I don't want no scrubs. A scrub is a guy that can't get no love from me, hanging out the passenger side of his best friend's ride, trying to holler at me. That's right, it's time to talk about TLC. WWE's fusion of tables, ladders, and chairs has made for one of the most exciting stipulations in wrestling history. It's also the only match type to share its name with an influential 90s girl group, unless there's an indie promotion out there booking Destiny's Child death matches, or Spice Girls slobber knockers, or something involving Daphne and Celeste. I couldn't think of a pun involving Daphne and Celeste, but did you know that they released their second album this year? That's actually true. The TLC match was born in the late Attitude Era, a brutal combination of the hardcore and ladder stipulations. Blending violence, drama, and legitimate carnage, TLC has been responsible for some of the most memorable bouts of the 21st century. Between August 2000 and the making of this video, there have been 21 TLC matches. But before we begin, we need to give a couple of honorable mentions. At No Mercy 1999, the Hardy Boys faced Edge and Christian in a ladder match for the managerial services of Terry Runnels. Later, at WrestleMania 2000, the Dudley Boys joined the party in that famous triangle ladder match. Both contests were very exciting, but neither were official TLC matches. Still, without them, it's safe to say that the stipulation would never have been born. Now, without any further ado, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and this is every single TLC match ranked from worst to best. Don't go chasing waterfalls, and join us. Number 21, The Miz vs. Jerry Lawler, Raw, November 29th, 2010. Even though it's bottom of our list, this match wasn't as bad as you might expect, especially given the two wrestlers involved. A man whose entire personality revolves around playing it safe and taking shortcuts, and a man who literally turned 61 on the day of this bout. Still, as you might expect, it wasn't exactly the most ambitious TLC match. Miz dominated at first because he's more than half Jerry Lawler's age, but the King fought back with a steel chair. Understandably, Miz took the majority of the bumps here, as well as Alex Riley, who found himself punched off the apron through a table. Because if we consult our big book of wrestling lore, Jerry Lawler is really good at punching. Eventually, against all odds, Lawler had the match won, only to be screwed out of a WWE Championship reign by Michael Pissing Cole. It was infuriating, which is obviously the point, but that doesn't mean it was good. Number 20, CM Punk vs. RYBACK, Raw, January 7th, 2013. This was the Raw where The Rock showed up and attacked CM Punk before their title match at the Royal Rumble. That was half the problem, really. Part of TLC's appeal is its unpredictability, not just in terms of big spots, but the sense that an upset could happen in amongst all the carnage. The suspense was completely stripped out of this match because we knew Rock vs. Punk was right around the corner. Okay, yes, WWE could have rebooked it and given us Rock vs. RYBACK, but can you imagine the outrage? There'd have been rioting in the streets. RYBACK dominated this match because he's a cross between a gorilla and a Machamp. He tossed Punk around the ring, he gave him a million clotheslines, he hurled him through a table on the outside. At one point, he also gorilla pressed Punk right onto the side of a ladder at a very unnatural angle. And it looked horrible. Somewhere in Chicago, Colt Cabana's podcast equipment turned itself on in anticipation. RYBACK was well on his way to winning the belt, but lost because the Shield interfered. They were Punk's super secret friends at the time, but while the finish made sense, it brought a predictable match to a predictable end. Number 19, Sheamus vs. Roman Reigns, TLC 2015. Karma would come back to bite Roman Reigns for his part in RYBACK's TLC loss, but not for almost 3 years. At TLC 2015, the fans didn't know who to boo. The backlash against Roman's push was as fearsome as ever, but he'd been screwed out of the title by Sheamus, and while everyone found it funny at first, they sort of realised, oh no, Sheamus is the WWE champion in 2015, how could this happen? So the atmosphere for this match was a little bit flat, I think it's fair to say. Credit to both wrestlers though, they tried their best to get the crowd on side. Sheamus put Reigns through various tables, but the big dog fought back into the match, drawing strength from the chanting of the WWE Universe. Yes, okay, they were chanting Daniel Bryan and NXT, but the point still stands. Towards the end, Roman took a terrifying bump off the ladder, his foot landing on the bottom rope. Somehow he was okay and recovered to Superman punch Sheamus through a table, only for the League of Bloody Nations to cost him the match. It was a flat finish for sure, but Reigns finally got the fans on his side by absolutely battering Triple H after the match. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective too. Number 18, Bray Wyatt vs. Dean Ambrose, TLC 2014. In the latter latter half of 2014, Dean Ambrose wasn't in the best place. The Shield had broken apart, but people figured that Ambrose, the most charismatic member of the group, would be fine. Then he lost to Seth Rollins at SummerSlam, then he lost to Seth Rollins on Raw, then he lost to Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell. In their efforts to push Rollins, WWE risked making the lunatic fringe look like a big old loser. He needed a victory over an opponent of similar stature, and when Bray Wyatt cost him at Hell in a Cell, it seemed like Ambrose had found the perfect candidate. This led to Ambrose vs Wyatt at TLC 2014, and it was pretty cool at first. Dean threw a ladder in Bray's face during his entrance, then they brawled in the crowd. They used a kendo stick before Ambrose dropped 3 elbows off progressively higher ladders. It was all going so well. Then the finish happened. Ambrose grabbed a TV monitor from under the ring because despite it being a TLC match with lots of weapons everywhere, he decided he needed to use this one in particular. Unfortunately, it blew up in his face. That's not a metaphor. The TV monitor literally blew up in his face and led to Bray Wyatt getting the pinfall. It was a very silly finish, and it's likely that without it, this match would have been far higher on our list. Number 17, Randy Orton vs John Cena, TLC 2013. In terms of stakes, this was the biggest TLC match of all time. John Cena, the World Heavyweight Champion, Randall Keith, the WWE Champion, both men putting it all on the line to unify the 2 biggest titles around. Yes, this was a big fight, no 2 ways about it. Unfortunately, it wasn't the big fight anybody wanted. By this stage of their careers, Cena and Orton had clashed numerous times in the past, and the fans were sick of it. If the wrestling industry was a huge video game, this would be Player 1 versus Player 2, as long as we don't count that Chikara game whose gimmicks were literally Player 1 and Player 2. The match itself was decent, if a little slow-paced. Both men beat each other down with weapons, although clearly the most brutal spot was when Cena climbed a little way up a ladder and dropped a 5-knuckle shuffle. The spirit of ECW lives on. Orton eventually resorted to using handcuffs, attaching Cena to a corner and throwing the key into the crowd. Wisely, Cena unscrewed the turnbuckle and climbed up to stop Randy, grabbing the ring rope with him. Orton grabbed the rope and yanked him off the ladder through a table, or sort of near a table, if we're being honest. It wasn't the best finish, but it did at least unify the titles in time for Daniel Bryan's WrestleMania 30 coronation. Number 16, Seth Rollins vs Baron Corbin, Raw, December 10th, 2018. This was the most recent TLC match to take place at the time of recording, and also the first for the Intercontinental Championship. Also, Heath Slater was the referee, we'll get to that in a second. The build to the match saw Seth blame General Manager-elect Corbin for Raw's recent decline. Yes, he blamed a kayfabe authority figure for real criticism of an actual show. That's like blaming Gail Platt if Coronation Street got cancelled. Luckily, the match itself was a lot more solid than the build-up. Rollins' natural ability helped him gain the upper hand, frog splashing Corbin through a table on the outside. His climb to victory, however, was stopped by the reluctantly corporate Heath Slater. Corbin had made him a referee for fun. Corbin looked to have the match won, only for Seth to halt his ascent with a buckle bomb through a table in the corner before superkicking poor Slater out of his shoes en route to victory. It's like WrestleMania 24 all over again. Well, not really. Number 15, Hornswoggle vs El Torito, Extreme Rules 2014. It's time to talk about WLC. Quite frankly, the WLC match should have been bottom of our list, and it even feels as though WWE wanted it to be a car crash. Everything seemed set up for failure, from the awful commentary team to the botched ring announcements. We therefore have to give credit to all of the wrestlers involved here. Not just El Torito and Hornswoggle, but the 3-man band and Los Matadores as well. Everyone put their bodies on the line to defy expectation and transform a pre-show laughingstock into a genuinely entertaining match. There was comedy, of course, like when Hornswoggle was too scared to jump off a miniature ladder or bounced back into the ring while attempting a suicide dive. But this match is mostly remembered for its destructive and dangerous spots, making it a more than worthy addition to the TLC canon. Our personal favourite is Drew McIntyre's outrageous swanton bomb dive through a table on the outside. Perhaps the most unnecessary risk ever taken on a WWE pre-show. Well, that and every time Rosenberg annoys a wrestler. Number 14, The Shield and Kurt Angle versus Braun Strowman, The Miz, Cesaro, Sheamus, and KANE, TLC 2017. WLC was supposed to be the silliest TLC match of all time, but it turned out better than expected. Now it's time to talk about the actual silliest TLC match of all time. It was still entertaining, but it managed to be completely absurd at the same time. Let's break down why. Number 1, it was a 5-on-3 handicap match for no other reason than to give the heels an unfair advantage. Kane, Strowman and Miz wasted a lot of time arguing and fighting, making the Shield's eventual victory not even that impressive. Number 2, illness sidelined various members of the Raw locker room before the show, including Roman Reigns. He was replaced by our collective dad, Kurt Angle, and yes, he made his entrance through the crowd, and yes, he wore the black body armor. Number 3, the silliest thing about this TLC match is the fact that The Miz orchestrated an attempted murder of Braun Strowman, teaming up with Kane and throwing him into the back of a garbage truck. It was even sort of implied that he'd been crushed to death forever. He was back 8 days later, emerging from the back of a completely different garbage truck in a different arena. Now we've got all that out the way, this match was actually a lot of fun. We were treated to Rollins and Ambrose's synchronized ladder dives, Angle doing a stretcher job only to come back like Foley and turn the tide, and a big finisher party on The Miz to wrap things up. It turned out alright in the end. Number 13, AJ Styles vs Dean Ambrose, TLC 2016. Ambrose and AJ's WWE title feud was a hit and miss affair, but you could argue that its high point came at TLC 2016. For the most part, this was a great battle between two men with very different styles. I say for the most part because, well, you'll see. Things kicked off with a wild and exciting brawl, with the use of chairs being a central theme. Ambrose, hungry to retain the title that Styles had taken from him, became angrier and angrier as the match wore on. He eventually snapped, setting up a ladder on the Spanish announce table and dropping a gigantic elbow on the champ below. AJ went one better, pulling off two ridiculous moves on Dean a little later. The first was a phenomenal forearm to save his title reign, knocking Ambrose down inches from the belt. The second was an outrageous 450 springboard to the outside, driving both men through a table. You might be wondering at this stage, if the match was so exciting, why is it only 13th on this list? Well, like a few other examples we've already talked about, it was let down by the finish. There's no getting away from it. Ambrose lost the match because James Ellsworth turned heel and shoved him off the ladder. His presence continued to cheapen the entire feud and ended the match on a down note as a result. Also, Styles had a small rip in his tights and people on the internet found it distracting and a little bit funny. Number 12, DX vs JERI-SHOW, TLC 2009. This was the first TLC match to take place on a TLC pay-per-view, and you could almost say that WWE played it safe as a result. Although far from the most high-octane TLC match around, this was an intelligent, slower-paced encounter featuring 4 trustworthy veterans. There was still a genuinely terrifying moment as Big Show was super-kicked while carrying Jericho on his shoulders, sending Y2J into a huge freefall outside of the ring. He was supposed to go through a table, but fell straight to the floor, almost face-planting the table on the way down. DX had clearly been brushing up on their co-op skills in the build-up to this match, with a finish straight out of the LEGO Star Wars games. With the only available ladder torn in half, Triple H acted as a makeshift base, allowing HBK to scamper up and win the tag titles. Nothing says degenerate like teamwork and resourcefulness. Number 11, Edge vs The Undertaker, One Night Stand 2008. By this stage of their rivalry, Edge and Undertaker had faced each other a number of times, including the excellent main event of WrestleMania 24. However, the TLC stipulation kept their feud fresh, even if it did rely too much on shenanigans down the stretch. This match was for the vacant World Heavyweight Championship, which Vicky Guerrero had stripped from Taker because she decided that the Hell's Gate was a naughty move. Also, if Undertaker lost, he would have to leave WWE forever. It was nice that Edge had a number of Undertaker's moves scouted here, having wrestled him frequently over the past few months. He still clearly wasn't confident of winning, however, enlisting the help of all of his friends. 4 members of his La Familia stable interfered: Kurt Hawkins, Zack Ryder, Chavo Guerrero, and even Bam Neely. Who'd have thought we'd be mentioning him on this video? Absolutely superb. At the time, Hawkins and Ryder were of course the Edgeheads. They'd go on to become that guy whose gimmick is losing all the time, and Kurt Hawkins. Taker was able to fight off all the interference, but it left him worn down, and he eventually lost. As per the stipulation, he was fired by Vicky and forced to leave the WWE. She brought him back around 3 weeks later. I love pro wrestling. Number 10, Kane vs Edge vs Rey Mysterio vs Alberto Del Rio, TLC 2010. This fatal 4-way TLC fused 2 separate feuds together. On one hand, we had a classic heel versus babyface encounter, Rey Mysterio and Alberto Del Rio, the crowd favorite against the brash newcomer. On the other, we had a slightly less traditional storyline. Edge had kidnapped the Big Red Machine's father, Paul Bearer, strapped him to a wheelchair, and would subject Kane to a series of sadistic mind games on a weekly basis. Kane was an emotional wreck by this stage, angry, worried, and desperate for his father back. But also, Kane was the heel and Edge was the babyface. What a wacky guy that Adam Copeland is, eh? Kidnapping people's dads. Strange backstory aside, this was a very solid TLC match, one which built nicely towards the finish. Everyone took risky bumps here, with Del Rio potentially suffering the worst of it down the stretch. Kane then took out Ray with a tombstone before being taken out himself with a thrilling spear by Edge. Don't worry, by the way, Edge would eventually give Bearer back, but not before convincing Kane that it was a mannequin, leading the Big Red Machine to brutally attack his own father without realizing. Classic babyface behavior from the rated R superstar. Number 9, Kane versus Bubba and Spike versus Chris Jericho and Christian versus Jeff Hardy and Rob Van Dam, Raw, October 7th, 2002. Typical big match Kane overcoming the odds to win again. This match was decided via Eric Bischoff's Raw Roulette system and was supposed to feature Kane's fellow tag champion, the Hurricane. However, before the match, Triple H and Ric Flair jumped the superhero, forcing Kane to defend the titles on his own. This is one of the most terrifying TLC matches of all time, featuring a number of scary spots. There was Jeff Hardy's leg drop through a table on the outside, RVD's Van Terminator to Kane, and Jericho's terrifying plummet from a ladder over the top rope. Watch it back. Y2J just disappears from view behind the apron. Somehow he was able to emerge unscathed. Huge credit must be given to Jericho for guiding Bubba through the latter half of this match, with the bigger man legitimately knocked loopy and unaware of his surroundings. It all came down to Kane, RVD, and Jericho. Y2J incapacitated Van Dam with the walls of Jericho atop the ladder, only for Kane to hit a massive chokeslam and retain the tag belts. Then Triple H came out and teased the upcoming Katie Vick storyline. Way to ruin the moment, Hunter. Number 8, Edge vs Ric Flair, Raw, January 16th, 2006. This was the first ever one-on-one match to be fought under TLC rules, and despite featuring a 56-year-old, it managed to be a very entertaining contest. Edge was reaching the peak of his heel powers, having just cashed in on John Cena to win his first ever WWE Championship. Although it seemed very unlikely that the Nature Boy would seize the title here, the pair squeezed every drop of emotion out of a hot crowd. It stands as proof that despite TLC favoring athleticism and daredevil stunt work, it can be matched with ring psychology and a solid grasp of storytelling. Jim Cornette would be proud. Maybe. Flair used every trick in the book to keep up with his younger, more ruthless foe, including the patented dick grab. When all else fails, grab your opponent's cock and balls. That's my motto. Flair bled in this match because, of course he did, and the camera even cut to a young Charlotte crying in the front row. Edge took the majority of the bumps, but did at one stage nail the Nature Boy with a huge superplex from a ladder to the canvas below. Eventually, with the help of Lita, the rated R superstar was able to retain his WWE Championship, but not before being pushed to the limit by the wiliest of veterans. If only Rick had used the dick grab on more than one occasion. Number 7, Edge vs John Cena, Unforgiven 2006. You're not going to believe this, but the odds were stacked against John Cena in this one. It took place in Edge's hometown of Toronto, Canada, under a stipulation that Cena had never taken part in. Edge also bragged that it was a match type he'd never lost, although his TLC record actually stood at 3-1 heading into Unforgiven. The atmosphere for this match was electric and can even be seen as a precursor to Cena's famous clash with CM Punk at Money in the Bank 2011. The Toronto crowd were firmly behind their hometown hero, even popping for a simple slap in the face early on. The violence was ramped up as the match progressed, with Edge slamming Cena through chairs and tables alike. Cena fought back with an offense seemingly based around Saturday morning cartoons. At one stage, he picked up a ladder and FU'd it onto a prone Edge, an unintentionally hilarious spot. I was almost waiting for him to whip out a giant mousetrap or a really heavy anvil, but sadly he never did. Lita tried to help Edge win again, as she did against Flair, but this time it backfired. Her chair shot sent Cena staggering into a ladder, which in turn sent Edge flying away from the title. Cena won soon after, and while this may have been a little sloppier than some other TLC matches, it more than made up for that in terms of sheer intensity. Number 6, CM Punk vs Alberto Del Rio vs The Miz, TLC 2011. Like the adult film industry, TLC matches are often guilty of putting action ahead of narrative. There was no such problem in December 2011 when a molten hot CM Punk took on Del Rio and The Miz in a pseudo handicap match. The heels teamed up at first, but their alliance predictably didn't last long, as Del Rio clocked poor Miz with a steel chair. Ricardo Rodriguez involved himself before long, handcuffing Punk to the ladder to halt his climb. Like Bruce Willis in Die Hard, Punk improvised, kicking away the frame of the ladder to break himself free. Miz worked his his way back into the match and had a go at handcuffing the straight-edge superstar, this time to the ring ropes. Punk eventually won, but everybody went all out to impress in this bout, and it really paid off. Even Ricardo Rodriguez took a massive bump, toppling backwards off a ladder to the outside. Bravo. Number 5, Jeff Hardy vs CM Punk, SummerSlam 2009. I'd wager that both men woke up feeling very sore the Monday after this match. Although that's okay because neither was on the Raw brand at the time. Yes, this was back in the day when a pair of SmackDown superstars were trusted with main eventing one of the big four. Until Fox get their very rich paws on the blue brand, we might not see that again for some time. Actually, come to think of it, would you bet against Shane McMahon main eventing WrestleMania? He is the best in the world after all. Anyway, the point is that this match looked so painful. At one stage, Punk caught Hardy's poetry in motion and slammed him down onto an upright chair, which I think officially falls under the category of bastard tactics. Later, a superplex saw them land directly on a prone ladder before Jeff scaled a massive ladder and demolished the Spanish announce table. Punk was on the table, by the way, he didn't just do it for fun, but we can see why you might think that. This is Jeff Hardy after all. The icing on the delicious violence cake saw both wrestlers fight off the medical team as they crawled back to the ring. Punk ultimately picked up the victory, only for the lights to go down and Jeff's unconscious body to be replaced by the Undertakers. One of the most memorable visuals in SummerSlam history. Number 4, Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit versus Edge and Christian versus the Dudley Boys versus the Hardy Boys, SmackDown May 24th, 2001. This match was announced at the top of SmackDown by Vince McMahon to an understandably huge pop. It was only the third TLC match ever and the first to take place on TV rather than pay-per-view. It also turned out to be one of the strongest in terms of storytelling, with the Canadian champs under assault from all angles, frantically scrapping to keep a hold of their tag titles. Sadly, there's no getting away from the uncomfortable fact that Benoit was the hero of the match. Early on, he missed a diving headbutt to the outside and crashed through a table before being stretchered out of the arena. Y2J fought bravely on his own. This set the scene for Benoit to re-emerge and save the day, retaining the tag titles and capping maybe the best TLC match ever, at least if we're judging it purely on the strength of its narrative. Number 3, Edge and Christian versus the Dudley Boys versus the Hardy Boys, SummerSlam 2000. As mentioned in the intro, it's debatable whether this is truly the first TLC match. It is by name at least, although it was certainly inspired by a few previous bouts. Conveniently, those matches also came from the back catalogue of these three legendary tag teams, so they probably didn't have to think too hard when putting this one together. In fact, thinking too hard would have probably been this match's downfall. How else would the Hardys have been brave enough to pull off the daredevil antics that peppered this bout? Credit must be given to all three tag teams, of course, but Matt and Jeff really came into their own here. And of course, because wrestling is cruel, they didn't pick up the victory. Instead, it was those dastardly blonde boys from north of the border who won after yanking away a ladder and leaving Jeff to dangle like an emo piñata, then throwing a ladder at him to knock him loose. Scum. Subhuman scum. Number 2, The Shield versus Team Hell No and RYBACK, TLC 2012. If you've never seen this match before, you might look at it and think that RYBACK sticks out like a big veiny sore thumb. He's definitely the Poochie of his team, but turned in a top-class performance, as did the other 5. This was the in-ring debut of The Shield, a highly anticipated event given their fondness for jumping babyface members of the roster. Sadly, it's a hard match to talk about without simply listing all of the cool things that happened. So, that's what we're going to do. Number 1, RYBACK dominating all of the heels out on his own, only for them to realise this and powerbomb him through the announce table. The bad guy's AI was really good in this game. Number 2, Bryan going all Tasmanian devil and diving fearlessly onto all three heels just after they'd taken RYBACK out of the running. Number 3, the outrageous double superplex off a table balanced like a platform across the top turnbuckle. Number 4, Bryan bravely taking on all three Shield members, only to get curb stomped onto a chair. It's just big moment after big moment, and everything they do makes sense. I won't spoil the ending if you haven't seen the match yet, because you really need to go and do so. Now please, straight away. Actually, not yet. Here's number 1. Number 1, the Dudley Boys versus the Hardy Boys versus Edge and Christian, WrestleMania 17. Although technically the second ever TLC match, this can be seen as the moment where the stipulation found its feet. It's also arguably the apex of the match type, an astonishing display of anarchy and excitement centered around 3 of WWE's greatest tag teams ever. The early days of TLC centered around each team specializing in one of the match's signature weapons, and that was never more evident than at WrestleMania 17. The high-flying Hardys dived off ladders with reckless abandon, the heelish Edge and Christian ground down their opponents with chair shot after chair shot, and this may come as a surprise, but the Dudley boys were often partial to a table spot or two. However, this match wasn't just mindless chaos. It also featured dramatic cameos from an ally of each team. The first to interfere was Spike Dudley, who hit Edge and Christian with a pair of Dudley dogs before Rhino ran in to even the odds, temporarily turning the match into a gore party. It was only a matter of time until Lita made an appearance, and she threatened to steal the show, nailing a head scissors on Rhino, destroying Spike with a chair shot, and finally falling to the 3D. The most famous spot in the match, and one of the most replayed moments in WWE history, came when Jeff Hardy was left dangling from the titles, only for Edge to bring him crunching back down to earth with an amazing flying spear. From start to finish, this match was wrestled at a frightening pace. It's a big reason why WrestleMania 17 is regarded as one of the best pay-per-views of all time, and for our money, it's the best TLC match ever to boot. So that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.